So several years ago, a massive tornado ripped through the city of Moore, Oklahoma, just a little bit south of Oklahoma City. It's a suburb of Oklahoma City. And at the time, we were living in Dayton, Ohio, and I remember watching the news and watching the images on TV, and myself and another pastor who was on staff at the church there in Dayton, in the Dayton area, we had both spent some time in the state of Oklahoma at different churches serving there, and so we felt a connection to those people and to that situation. And we felt like we wanted to do something to help them. And so the church there and that community came together, and we packed a trailer full of supplies. And we decided we'd do one of those real quick into the area trip and right back around in 2 days. And so we drove down there to Oklahoma City, to Moore, Oklahoma. And I can still remember as we were driving along Interstate 35 and coming down through the heart there of that community and seeing all the debris, because that massive F5 tornado that struck that town had actually crossed over the interstate. And I could see all the papers and all the pieces of homes, and there were shingles and there was just debris everywhere. And we could see all the power trucks that were lined up in different parking lots, and we could see the National Guard trucks that were there helping to direct traffic, helping to be with people there. And so we pulled in and to one of the churches there. A Nazarene church was kind of the command center for the relief organization called Nazarene Compassionate Ministries. And we brought our supplies in, and to see the people walking around, there was just an eeriness to the moment. People looked empty and shell-shocked. And we were so thankful that we could bring supplies to help replenish that relief organization. And it's interesting about these relief organizations that come into communities and cities and towns that have been struck by these kinds of disasters. See, the relief organizations that show up are there to help people know how to take their next steps. And because when you are struck by something like that and hit by something like that, you don't know what the next step is. You are just consumed by the moment in a fog. It's a surreal experience that follow a disaster like this. See, relief organizations come along and help people like them because the organizations know what's next. They know that what each person needs to do in order to start the process of rebuilding, the process of starting over. See, these organizations come in and bring tangible hope for victims and communities. It's a kind of hope that props them up, and even at times, the hope carries these people through the circumstance and through the unknown of those first couple of days. Because in those early days, victims and communities cannot grasp their future. All they can see is what has happened to them. And the reality is that for all of us and for the world, actually, we are in a moment like this, a dangerous moment, where it's very hard to see what's next. And that is why I feel like it's so important for us to spend over these next few weeks where we dive into hope. See, when we cannot see beyond our current circumstances, hopelessness can find its way into our lives. Hopelessness grows in environments where we are beat down and battered by the storms that life throws at us. And this moment isn't quite like any storm we've ever experienced. And I don't care if you believe in the pandemic or not, this is a wild storm that humanity finds itself in. We are listening for anything that will tell us that everything is going to be okay. We are turning to politicians and untruths. And some of us are actually spreading despair faster than the virus is spreading. Because somehow in this upside down world, some are finding comfort in paranoia. When what really is happening is we are looking for hope, even a hope that we can somehow produce. But there's a whole different kind of hope that we need. We need a hope that is powerful enough to help us see beyond what has happened to us, even beyond what is happening. And this hope can only come from trusting that there is a God who is working even in the midst of life's wildest, traumatic, life-altering storms. This is a kind of hope that actually has a life to show how real it is. And that is the very real life of Jesus Christ. Because the kind of hope that comes from Jesus is rooted in a real life-changing experience that overcame even the power of death itself. See, Jesus being raised from the dead is where we can find our very real hope. And since the beginning of time when there was a breakdown between creation and the Creator, life has had sickness. Life has had pain and suffering. And death was known as the finish line for life until Jesus stepped into our space and changed the whole finish line. Listen to what the Apostle Paul wrote to the church in Colossae. Colossians chapter 1, verses 15 through 23. Listen to these words he sends them. He says, Christ is the visible image of the invisible God. He existed before anything was created and is supreme over all creation. For through him, God created everything in the heavenly realms and on earth. He made the things we can see and the things we can't see, such as thrones, kingdoms, rulers, and authorities in the unseen world. Everything was created through him and for him. He existed before anything else, and he holds creation together. Christ is also the head of the church, which is his body. He is the beginning, supreme over all who rise from the dead. So he is first in everything. For God in all his fullness was pleased to live in Christ, and through him God reconciled everything to himself. He made peace with everything in heaven and on earth by means of Christ's blood on the cross. This includes you who were once far away from God. You are his enemies, separated from him by evil thoughts and actions, yet now he has reconciled you to himself through the death of Christ in his physical body. As a result, he has brought you into his own presence, and you are holy and blameless as you stand before him without a single fault. But you must continue to believe this truth and stand firmly in it. Don't drift away from the assurance you received when you heard the good news. The good news has been preached all over the world, and I, Paul says, have been appointed as God's servant to proclaim it. See, Paul makes it very clear who Jesus is. He writes this letter to the church in Colossae. They had been struggling with all these other influences and teachings, trying to add to what they had learned about Jesus and telling them that Jesus was not everything that they needed. He was only half the answer. And Paul, who himself had once been this very passionate Jewish leader in the Jewish religion, even to the point of having people killed who believed that Jesus was God. Now this same Paul is writing a letter like this, reminding this young church who Jesus is. That everything they need to know about God the Creator, everything we need to know about what God has done for all of humankind, what God has done for us, what has been made available to us, is found in Jesus Christ. Our hope of knowing the very one who was in the beginning and end of all creation is found in Jesus. This pandemic began somewhere at the end of last year. But I promise you this, that the pandemic will come to an end because everything has a beginning and an ending. Time will have an ending, and I don't know what that will look like, and I'm pretty sure that even Elon Musk doesn't know what that will look like. But here's what Paul is saying in these words, that Jesus was in the beginning and he will be at the end, and that there is nothing that is outside the reach of Jesus. There is nothing that is happening in this world that is beyond Jesus' influence. Oh, come on. I know it's 9 o'clock and you're wearing masks. Whether we respond to this influence, to his influence, is another issue. How we respond and how we make our life decisions, none of it is beyond his influence, but all of it is a free choice. That's what Jesus did. That's what God did through Jesus. Jesus chose to lay his life down. Jesus chose to go to battle with evil and the power of selfishness. Jesus chose to go to war with death itself, and he came out victorious. This is why we have a hope that is real. God made peace with a rebellious creation through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Paul writes this, and this is for all of us. You were his enemies, separated from him by your evil thoughts and actions, yet now he has reconciled you to himself through the death of Christ in his physical body. We have a hope that is real because of what Jesus did for us, because what Jesus did for us is real. The struggle between good and evil, when it feels like the world is coming unglued. Remember this is important this morning. Remember this, an existence held together by Jesus can never become unglued. There may be suffering, there may be sorrow, there may be unknowns, there may be temporary uncertainty, but know this, our hope for the future is based on a person who came back to life. Jesus turned the uncertainty on its head. Just when they thought he was out, just when it looked like the evil had really won, Jesus overcame. But remember this, the evil Jesus came to overcome was not another human being. Jesus prayed on the cross that God would forgive those who didn't know what they were doing. Listen to me now. Jesus offered hope to even those who harmed him. Wouldn't it be great if we saw more of that being posted on Facebook? Particularly from Jesus' followers. See, when evil thought it had sucked the oxygen out of the body of Jesus, he breathed new life. And that is why we can have a hope that is real. And this is what he does for us. When we think we can't go on, when the news just seems like it keeps getting worse, when we don't know how we're going to pay the bills, when we don't know what we're going to do with the kids and their future education, when we think we can't hold on any longer, this is good. See, when we think we can't hold on any longer, there's something about this hope that we have in Jesus that is different. See, hope found in Jesus is a hope that holds on to us. Hope found in Jesus is a hope that holds on to us. Paul says that because of what Jesus has done, we have access to God like never before. Because of who Jesus is and what Jesus has done, we are no longer outsiders to the Creator. But we can never forget how far God was willing to go for us. We cannot forget that God has not left us. Paul challenges the church in Colossae to stand firmly planted. He says in verse 23, but you must continue to believe this truth and stand firmly in it. Don't drift from the assurance that you have, that you received when you heard the good news. Don't drift. It's difficult to stand firm when it feels like life all around you is shaking, doesn't it? When you're in the middle of the storm, when it feels like the ground is always moving, it's tough. It's tough to stay focused on love like Jesus when you're freaking out on the inside. It's tough not to take the bait on social media. It's tough to actually trust that there is a God who is working when it feels like nothing is working, when it feels like it comes in waves. We had the chance a few days ago to be with Becky's family, and they have a little place out on a river where her dad parks the boat. And we were out there, and we were with our kids, and Becky's brother and his family were out there, and their little kids were getting together with them, and watching them play on the dock was so much fun. And it includes somebody always carrying around a fishing pole that always has a hook on it, and everybody's very scared. I like to go and just stand in the boat while it's even parked on the dock there, and sometimes I just like to sit there and look out over the river. But I would watch as these boats would go by, and I would watch the waves. And I took 30 seconds, I counted one time, for the waves to make it over to where the dock was. And I would watch as the little ones, my kids are a little bigger, but the 3-year-old and the 6-year-old would be out there on the dock and trying to play around up there, and those waves would make the dock raise up and down, and they would start to lose their balance. And real quick, one of us adults would have to jump over there on the dock and stand next to them, make sure they didn't fall in. They all had life jackets on. Jesus' disciples found themselves one night in a boat, and the waves were crashing in on them. There's a story in Mark chapter 6. Listen to this story. This is right after Jesus had fed thousands of people and performed this incredible miracle. The night after that, late that night, the disciples were in their boat in the middle of the lake, and Jesus was alone on the land. He saw that they were in serious trouble, rowing hard and struggling against the winds and waves. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came toward them walking on the water. He intended to go past them. But when they saw him walking on the water, they cried out in terror, thinking he was a ghost, even though they had just spent all this time and seen him turn a little bit of bread and a few fish into a ton of food. They were all terrified when they saw him. Listen here, though. But Jesus spoke to them at once. Don't be afraid, he said. Take courage. I am here. Then he climbed into the boat, and the wind stopped, and they were totally amazed. Jesus saw them out on that lake. He saw that they were in trouble. And it says, basically he was just going to make an appearance, right? He was just going to go by them. But they become more afraid of him than they were the wind and the waves. And part of what had happened in the church of Colossae that Paul was addressing was their inability to see that Christ was enough. When all the unexplainable things started happening, people start making stuff up. Just like these disciples who knew that what Jesus looked like. They'd just been with him, but now they think he's a ghost. And they work themselves up over the wrong thing. Jesus was probably just going to go by and calm the waters, but instead they get sidetracked with their despair. So Jesus steps into the boat and says, "Hey, it's me." But Jesus spoke to them at once. Don't be afraid, he said. Take courage. I am here. See, this is our hope that is real. God in Jesus stepped into the storm called human existence. with all of its selfishness, sickness, suffering, and death. And Jesus has stepped into the boat with us. He is with us. No matter what kind of storm we might experience, Jesus is now in the boat with us. And this is the kind of hope that is real and can help us through this storm. This week, one of our friends, a close friends in Nebraska, their little elementary age son had open heart surgery. They were in our small group when we lived there, and we knew that this day would eventually come because he had had heart complications since he was born. Talk about, can you imagine all of this stuff going on around us, and then you add something like this, to feel like there are so many pieces in your life that is just turned upside down. And on the day before his surgery, his mom posted this devotional. It's a mixture of scriptures put together, and it's as if God was speaking to her. And one of the lines in the devotional said this: "Do not wear yourself out by worrying about whether you can cope with the pressures. Keep looking to me and communicating with me as we walk through this day together." I'm going to read that one more time. I think just allow God to speak to you in these words, through these words. Do not wear yourself out by worrying about whether you can cope with the pressures. Listen to God. Hear God say, keep looking to me and communicating with me as we walk through this day together. He made it through the surgery, but now they're having to wait and watch as he struggles a little bit with these early days of recovery. Would you keep our friends in prayer? Paul and Leslie, their daughter Avery, and their little boy Calvin. See, life is going to throw storms at us. Sometimes big, overwhelming F5 tornado type of pain and uncertainty. Moore, Oklahoma, they've rebuilt. The elementary school that was there that had collapsed has been rebuilt with stronger walls and reinforced walls. Lives were slowly and are continuing to be put back together. And yes, they still have big, bad storms in Oklahoma every spring. But in those moments, when they can't see beyond what has happened to them, there are people who step in and remind them that they can pick up the pieces. See, we have someone who doesn't even wait for the storm of life to be over. He has stepped right smack dab into the middle of it with us. And he reminds us that there is hope in him. There is real hope in Jesus Christ. Let's stand together. I'm going to ask you to bow your heads and close your eyes. I just want to ask you a few questions as we move into a time of reflection. If you're watching online, watching in Founders Hall, would you take a moment to bow your heads and listen to these words, these questions? Today, do you know the giver of real hope? Do you know the giver of real hope? You can. Today, you can open your life up to the same Jesus who walked on the water and stepped into the boat. He will never, ever leave you. He wants to be with you. Do you know the giver of hope? this morning, have you allowed fear to cause you to be blind to the hope of Jesus? Have you allowed fear to cause you to be blind to the hope found in Jesus? What needs to change? What needs to change today, this week, to help you know the very real hope of Jesus? Let's pray together. Father, you are speaking to us today, and I believe with all my heart that we needed to be reminded of the very real hope found through your Son, Jesus, the one who has made you visible to us, the one whose life shows us real hope. God, I pray for whoever may be watching, whoever may be here today, whoever may be watching in another room. God, I pray that if they have not said yes to you, if they have not given their lives to you, that they would open themselves up and allow your hope to come to life in them. A hope that helps us to see beyond the current circumstances to a future in you. God, I pray that as your people, we would not allow fear or the voices or the untruths to pull us away. You are our hope. For it's in your name I pray. Amen.